Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I have the great pleasure of introducing Donna Brinton, who is a retired faculty member from UCLA's Department of TESOL and Applied Linguistics. She currently works as an ELT author and consultant. Her primary areas of expertise are content-based instruction, teaching pronunciation, and general TESOL methodology. We're so happy to have her here as our first plenary speaker for our first virtual conference. I'll be your moderator for this session and help you get your questions asked as we go through our presentation. So welcome and thank you, Donna.
Oh, you're most welcome. All right, so welcome everyone to this wonderful virtual conference. I'm so happy to be one of the speakers. TESOL has been very much a part of my life and something that's meant a lot to me. I've been on the board of directors, I've been the journal editor, I've been the college university chair and assistant level chair, and so I'm particularly happy to be contributing a little bit toward TESOL as an organization. I'm going to go ahead and try to get my video off. My session today is titled Achieving Coherence in Theme-Based Instruction, Applying the 6 T's to CBI Course Design. And I'm going to be covering this for all of us, talking a little bit about content-based instruction in general, but more specifically about theme-based instruction. I'll give you just a minute to take a look at the session abstract here, which is on the screen, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. All right, so I want to start talking about CBI as a syllabus. Many of you may think of CBI as a method, but in fact, most of us who are CBI practitioners prefer to think of it as a syllabus, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. I want to talk about the 3 so-called CBI prototypes, and then I'm going to do a little bit of putting theme-based instruction into perspective. I want to talk about the strengths of theme-based instruction, but I'm also going to be concentrating a little bit on the potential weaknesses of theme-based instruction, and these include something that is referred to in the literature as the potpourri approach. Don't worry if that doesn't mean much to you, I'll be explaining it. And then I want to talk about sort of a proposed solution for this potpourri approach weakness in the CBI syllabus, and that is the so-called 6 T's framework from Frederica Stoller and Bill Grabe, and then I'll be closing with some final thoughts. All right, so all the way back to 1997, Dave Eskey is the first person who tried to analyze what content-based instruction was. Was it a method? Was it a syllabus? And he comes down on the side of arguing for CBI being a syllabus type. This is from the 1997 article that Ann Snow and I published in the Content-Based Classroom, but in fact, an earlier version of it was actually published in the TESOL Journal, 1992, TESOL approached Ann Snow and myself about doing a special theme-based issue on content-based instruction. So content-based instruction has had strong foothold in TESOL for a long time. And here's what Dave Eskey said back in actually 1992 and then again republished in 1997. He says, "The content-based syllabus is best viewed as an even newer attempt to extend and develop our conception of what a syllabus for a second language course should comprise, including a concern with language form and language function, as well as a crucial third dimension, the factual and conceptual content of such courses." So we're sort of entering 3 dimensions: language form, language function, and content. Oh, sorry. So what is a syllabus? I think all of us know what a course syllabus is. It refers to that public document that we often pass out at the beginning of a class that defines the course content. It usually lists course objectives, components, other requirements. In short, it's the overall plan for the course. But I prefer to think of it really as the organizing feature for the course. And that's what content-based instruction really does. It organizes the course based on the content that's being used to present language. Sometimes the syllabus is analyzed as an analytic syllabus type. So we have basically, based on the work of Wilkins, two types of syllabuses: a synthetic syllabus, which begins with bits and pieces, and the learner's job is then to put those bits and pieces together to create the whole of language. And the classic example of a synthetic syllabus is the grammatical syllabus. And then we have the sort of preferred form of syllabus today, which is the analytic syllabus, to which content-based instruction belongs, as well as task-based instruction and project-based instruction. And these three syllabuses for language courses have a lot in common. They're holistic approaches, so you begin with the whole and you work down to the bits as opposed to the synthetic syllabus. And the basic difference between the three syllabuses is the major focus. So in a content-based syllabus, we begin with content, whereas in the task-based syllabus, we begin with the task, and in a project-based syllabus, we begin with the project. But they're complementary approaches. All right. I was going to try to do a poll. I'm not sure if we have the poll preloaded. Do we have the poll preloaded, Amy?
We do. So if everyone would, up in the top on the right, you have your chat, your QA, and then the poll. So if you click on that, you'll be able to see it.
Okay, and basically in the poll, I'm just asking you to answer the question that's on the slide here: which syllabus type is used to organize your courses? This is just for my information. Is it a content-based syllabus? So basically, if you open the textbook or if you look at the syllabus itself, does it list the content as sort of the first thing on the page, or is it a task-based syllabus, grammatical, skill-based, or other? So let's wait and see what kind of results we have here. Hoping we get some answers from the audience.
It just got opened, so it'll take just a moment for everyone to find it.
Okay. If this were a live context, I'd ask you raise your hands, but we don't have that option. So let's hope we can get some answers to the question using our poll function here. Should we continue to wait here? I'm just wondering if...
$256 responses.
Oh, we do. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I can't see that on my screen, so...
Oh, it's at the bottom. Do you have the... do you see the results at all?
No.
Did you go to polls open?
Oh, no, of course I didn't. I'm not sure I can do that at this point.
Okay, I can tell you what the answers
Okay, why
are.
don't you just tell me what the answers are?
Content-based is 140 people, 44%.
Okay.
Task-based, 48 people, 15%.
Mm-hmm.
Grammar-based, 42 people, 13%. skill-based 71 people, 22%, and other 17 people, 5%.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting. I am still glad to see that content-based is sort of ahead of the others, since that means that the topic that I'm talking about is maybe more relevant to a lot of the people in the audience. Okay, can we go back to my slides? Okay. So moving on to the 3 prototype models of content-based instruction, and this is from the actually from the original book that we did on content-based instruction. I'm citing here the 2003 edition of the content-based classroom, but a lot of this work went back even earlier. These were the models that we found available back when we first began looking. I'm going to be concentrating today on theme-based instruction, and I won't be talking about sheltered instruction or adjunct, but just for those of you who are wondering, sheltered instruction is usually something that occurs in the K-12 context, and it's when we separate out the second language learners in content courses so that we can work more efficiently with them and more effectively with them using a content teacher who's very often been trained specifically to work with second language learners. And adjunct instruction is kind of a combination of the theme-based and sheltered. So we have a language teacher working together with a content teacher and sharing their syllabuses and doing a lot of cooperative work. I'm not going to say more about either one of those, but perhaps if people have questions at the end, we could talk a little bit more about those. All right, let's move on to putting theme-based instruction in perspective. So basically in a theme-based syllabus, what we have are themes that have been determined to be of interest and relevance to the learners. And these themes create the organizing principle for the syllabus. They are meant to create and sustain student motivation. They are also intended to provide the rich input that allows learners to acquire new language. They form the point of departure for all of the skill-based instruction and all of the language-based instruction that we as language teachers are doing in the classroom. And then this next one is kind of important to what I'm going to be saying a little bit later on. A theme-based curriculum can vary in length. It could be an entire semester of instruction on one theme, or it could be the sort of more typical textbook format where you might have 4 pages or 8 pages or even 10 pages on a particular theme, and then you move on to another theme. So the former one, where it might take an entire semester, is what we often refer to in the CBI literature as a sustained content course. Those are not nearly as common as the sort of unit by unit theme-based approaches that I'm going to be talking more about today. So the course organization looks like this. In a multi-skills ESL, EFL theme-based course, each module is organized around a different theme. Here's some common themes that you might be familiar with: extreme sports, voluntourism, reducing your carbon footprint, smart cars, therapy pets. The publishers very often are wanting these themes to be themes that they can use around the world. So there are certain themes that are safe and other themes that authors of theme-based textbooks are often steered away from. And that might be one reason why you find a lot of the same themes being used in similar textbook series. That's one of the complaints I sometimes hear from teachers. All right, so let's look at the strengths of a theme-based curriculum, and let's look at the weaknesses. Because I am a content-based practitioner, obviously, I am convinced that there are a lot of strengths of theme-based instruction and CBI in general. One of these strengths is that you're connecting language to the real world. When you pick a theme that's of high interest to your learners and that's relevant to their lives, you are connecting their lives in the classroom to their lives outside of the classroom. We're also exposing learners to authentic issues. And then we're providing what I like to call a carrier topic for the teaching of skills and language issues. And the carrier topic is really what we used to refer to as a contextualizing device. Back in the days of grammar-based teaching, when I was trained to be a teacher, we were always told that we needed to contextualize the grammar point. And sometimes that was something that was a little difficult to do, especially with no guidance being given from a lot of the textbooks that we used back in that time period. I'm going to take an example, and this example is from National Geographic Learning. It's a very comprehensive textbook series with the title Our World. And this textbook series was developed for young learners. It's one of the sort of most comprehensive textbook series that I'm familiar with, richly illustrated, beautiful graphics, and lots of ancillary materials. They even have a little side set of folk tales that go along with a lot of the units. So it's been created for teachers as a very rich resource. There are videos, lots of different things. It is also a theme-based approach to language teaching. The editors of this textbook are Joan Kang-shin and Jody Crandall, both of whom are content-based practitioners, so this doesn't surprise me at all. And here's what they had to say about their textbook series. They say, learning about the world through theme-based teaching benefits young learners as different topics provide informational structure and a meaningful basis for exploration through a variety of language learning tasks. Learning is enriched through activities that expand knowledge of the world and its culture, people, and places. So this is the sort of philosophical underpinnings of this particular textbook series. Moving on to some potential weaknesses, and here's just one of the units in this Our World series, Look at the Bug. When we're putting together a theme-based unit or a theme-based textbook, one of the things we need to do is figure out how to select themes. So selecting themes, we're looking for what would be relevant to the learners. And in this one is for young learners, so Look at the Bug might be something that's very motivational for a lot of the young learners, although maybe more for the boys than for the girls in the class. Is it novel? I think Look at the Bug is a pretty novel theme. It's not what we find is a lot of these themes being recycled again and again. I don't know a lot of content-based textbooks that have a whole unit on bugs. Culturally relevant. Will it pique student interest? And then is it coherent from unit to unit? So we can look at any textbook series or any content-based syllabus that's been teacher produced, for example, and we could decide what do we think in terms of the selection of the theme, its novelty, its cultural relevance, will it interest students, and is it coherent from unit to unit? And the coherent from unit to unit is really what I want to focus on more today in the rest of this talk. When I was young, like late teenager, there was a movie that was called If It's Tuesday, It Must Be Belgium. And I remember this really well because whenever I look at theme-based textbooks and I think about the coherence, I think about this idea of if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. It was a film that was satire of Americans going to Europe and spending one day in each one of the major capitals, such that they really got no impression at all about what that particular country was like. And they were often even confused. Are we in Rome or are we in Brussels? And so I like to think of this idea of coherence from unit to unit, kind of in terms of this film, If It's Tuesday, It Must Be Belgium. How do we make the linkage between the different places that we're going in this film or in the textbook? This is the so-called potpourri approach criticism of theme-based instruction. And potpourri simply means a mixture of things, here especially in a musical or literary medley, in this case, a mixture of things in a textbook. So how do we get this mixture of things, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and how do we connect them so that it's a smoother transition for the teacher and a smoother transition for the learner? So what I want to do now is move into this idea of achieving coherence within and across curricular units. And this is where I'm going to be talking about the 6 T's framework from Stoller and Grabe. So here's our World 5. I am going to show you our World 5 and our World 6 to give you an idea of what the theme-based units look like. So we have extreme weather, copycat animals, life out there, amazing plants, volcanoes, cool vacations. And what you see is a lot of topics that have been chosen because they appeal to the young learner population that's using this textbook. But what you can also see is maybe there's not a lot of connection between, for example, extreme weather and amazing plants and cool vacations. And so this is the challenge for the teacher, and it's the challenge that I'm going to be addressing. Here's our World 6. Again, a lot of different themes: exciting sports, chocolate, it's a small world, smart choices, robots rule, amazing adventures at sea, all very interesting topics. But then if we move from Unit 1 to Unit 2 to Unit 3, this is a little bit like, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. If it's Wednesday, it must be Rome. If it's Thursday, it must be Paris. And what's the connection between those? What's the connection between exciting sports and histories, a mystery, etc.? All right, so moving on to this idea of the 6 T's, and I'm citing here the article from the 2017, which is the 2nd edition of the Content-Based Classroom, where this article is found, but they also published it in the 1st edition. And what Stoller and Grabe are proposing is that we can use these 6 T's, themes, topics, texts, tasks, transitions, and threads, to better connect the units and to create some kind of coherence in our teaching efforts. So by themes, they say central ideas that organize major curricular units, typically multiple themes explored in a given term. Topics. Topics are the subunits of the content that explore more specific aspects of the theme, and these topics are selected to complement student interests, content resources, teacher preferences, and curricular objectives. Texts, content resources written and oral, which drive the basic planning of the theme units. So those are the first 3 T's: themes, topics, and texts. Moving on to tasks, instructional activities and techniques utilized in the classroom. And these tasks need to be connected to and need to be derived from the texts that have been selected. So obviously, if it's a reading text, we have to think about what kinds of tasks are appropriate to use with that particular type of reading text. If it's a listening text, then we probably have different types of tasks that we might get our learners engaged in. And now the final 2, and these are the ones that I think are maybe ones that we as teachers don't always pay attention to and don't always think about. And I think this is also what makes this 6 T's framework so powerful for teachers. Transitions. So according to Stoller and Grabe, these transitions need to be explicitly planned linkages across topics in a thematic unit and across the texts and tasks within them that create a greater curricular coherence. And then secondly, the transitions provide a means for reviewing and recycling content and language across themes and for revisiting learning strategies. And then the very final one, which is the threads, the linkages across themes that create greater curricular coherence. I want to show a more concrete example of what I mean by these 6 T's. So let's take the example of save the environment. So let's assume we have a broad overarching theme, and that overarching theme is save the environment. This is very much in keeping with the Our World text, because a lot of their units do have to do with what we could do to improve our environment. The topics underneath this broad overarching theme, we could think of all sorts of them. I've just listed a few here, a few possible ones. Reducing plastic waste. So that might be one entire topical unit. What about environmental legislation? This particular unit is aimed more at adult learners. I think it was originally designed for learners in an intensive English program. And then individual actions. What could we do as an individual that would count toward this idea of saving the environment? What kinds of texts could we select? Again, here, there's a huge number of texts that we could pick, but we're going to have to think about ones that are relevant to our topic, ones that are relevant to our theme, but also ones that are appropriate for the level of learner that we have. If we have young learners versus learners in the K-12 context versus adult learners in the adult ed context, we're going to be probably wanting to find different texts to select for them. Here, the ones that I've listed just as an example: 10 ways to reduce plastic pollution, which is a reading text; Seas of Plastic, which is a listening text, probably a video; and then some kind of an internet research group project. What kinds of tasks could we design? For the reading text, for example, some kind of a task that has to do with reading for main idea. For the listening text, perhaps an information gap where we have different students listening for different things and then coming together to share, creating a group poster, doing some kind of an oral presentation. These are all possible tasks with this particular unit in mind. And then transition. Here, what we want to do is transition from the different tasks, and here, individual and societal actions offers itself up as a transition from task to task and from text to text. And then finally, let's assume that our next unit is going to be a unit on civil rights, something quite different from Save the Environment. So here we're taxed as teachers to think about how can we create some kind of coherence between Save the Environment and civil rights. And here we could take, again, this idea of the responsibility of the individual in society. So that's concretely what is meant by the 6 T's: theme, topic, text, and then task, transition, and thread. Okay, if I had you as a live audience, I would probably at this point group you and give you a task to do. That task might be something like, imagine that you are teaching a unit on the theme extreme weather, and then it's a teacher-created unit. So what are some topics that you might include? What tasks and texts would be appropriate for the topic, and then for the actual texts, what tasks would be appropriate? And then, assuming that your next unit is amazing plants, what might your transition be? And finally, what kind of thread could you use to tie your entire course together? Since we don't have that opportunity of putting you in groups, I'll just throw out a few ideas. So what type of topics could we include in a unit on extreme weather? Pretty obvious here. This is not a very difficult question. We could say tornadoes, hurricanes, drought. There are all sorts of things. And again, here, because we want it to be relevant to the issues that the learners experience, then living in California, drought might be one that would be very, very appropriate. And that might be something that we want to focus on. What about the tasks and texts? It's pretty easy to find anything on the internet today. The challenge is more finding something that's level appropriate for your students and that's also relevant to them. If you have young learners, it's going to be a very different text than you would have for adult learners. Assuming your next unit is Amazing Plants, so one thing we could do here is our in terms of our transition, we might want to think about if we've been talking about drought in our classroom, and if that's what our unit has been sort of focusing on, our unit on extreme weather, then maybe what we want to do is find out, are there plants that more easily survive drought? What kinds of plants survive drought? Or what kinds of plants come back immediately or within a year after a drought? And so that could be some way of connecting this extreme weather unit with our next unit on Amazing Plants. And then what kind of thread could you use to tie your entire course together? The authors of the Our World textbook have chosen this kind of very broad overarching thread, which is our world. If we're creating a teacher unit, what we might want to do is we might want to use this more to tie the course together and say, let's look at a world in crisis. That could be the thread that we're tying together with drought versus the Amazing Plants, or managing climate change. That would be another possibility. All right, some sort of final thoughts to sum up, and then we have quite a bit of time devoted to questions, so I'll be happy to answer some questions. Some caveats about content-based instruction. From my experience as a content-based practitioner, I started doing content-based instruction way back in the late 1980s, and it's been a very, very large part of my career. I've got several publications, book-length publications on how to do content-based instruction, and also tons and tons of professional presentations about content-based instruction. I would be the last person in the world to tell you that content-based instruction is the only way to go or is the best approach to teaching English language. However, I think it has a lot more strengths than it has weaknesses, although I've been focusing a little bit more on the weaknesses in this particular presentation. And I think that it's been embraced pretty much by the textbook, the publishers in the textbook market. So we see a lot of the this idea of content-based permeating our profession. I'm going to start with the first thing here. Content-based instruction or content-based language teaching is a highly flexible model of instruction. I mentioned at the outset a little bit about the other forms of content-based instruction, not just theme-based, but also sheltered and adjunct. In the latest publication that Ann Snow and I did, we have a new map of content-based instruction, and we have something like 14 or 15 different types of content-based instruction that we go into. It's a model that continues to flex as new contexts begin to adapt it as a way of teaching language. Content-based instruction is context sensitive. So I do believe that it needs to be adapted to the specific context in which it's being implemented. A lot of times when I talk about content-based instruction at professional conferences like this, I get people coming up afterwards or asking questions in the Q&A session, and they say, well, we're doing something kind of similar to what it is you talked about, but we're not doing it exactly the same way, and so we must be doing it wrong. I'd like to go on record as saying there is no real wrong way to do this, because it is going to depend a lot on the context in which you are working. So you're going to make changes in the way that content-based instruction is implemented in the classroom based on your specific context. Obviously, content that you choose for your units has to be age appropriate, and I think that's one reason I wanted to choose this textbook for young learners, so you could see what a young learner approach to using theme-based instruction might look like. It needs to be relevant to the lives of students, and it needs to be motivating. I recently did some work as an English language specialist in Kurdistan, and one of the things they wanted me to talk about was content-based instruction. And I had them bring in their textbooks because they told me our textbooks are content-based. They're, each unit has a different type of content or theme. And I asked them, well, which ones are relevant to the lives of your students and which ones are not? And they universally said to me, we hate the one on railroads. And I said, well, why don't you like the one on railroads? Well, there are no railroads in our entire country, and our students have never seen a train, and our students have no interest whatsoever in taking a train to go from point A to point B, which is a lot of what the textbook is talking about. So that's an example of where a theme is poorly chosen because it's not at all relevant to the lives of students and therefore not motivating. Next point, curricular goals must be approach specific. They must be clearly spelled out, and they must reflect the needs and the interests of the students. The materials that we choose have to be reflective of our curricular goals. Even more importantly, they have to be appropriate in level. And this last one this actually comes from the very early work that I did in language teaching, and my co-author on that first book was Mari Vesha from the University of Ottawa. She liked to talk about texts that were rich in language teaching possibilities. I think it's hard to put your finger on that one, but I like that idea of selecting texts that are rich in language teaching possibilities. All texts obviously have possibilities for teaching language, but there are some texts that you find that you think this is the perfect text for teaching this particular grammatical issue, or this is the perfect text for teaching a way of organizing your writing, for example. In-service education can assist teachers in better understanding the model and in more successfully implementing it. So here I'm picking up on this idea that we don't necessarily do a good job of teaching using content-based instruction, or in this case, theme-based instruction, if we don't understand the basic underlying principles of it. I'll give you another example from my experience as an English language specialist. I worked in Lebanon, and the teachers there told me, we don't like the topics at all because they're all about Lebanon. They're about the cedars of Lebanon, and they're about, the seascape. And I said, well, I think that the reason that they've chosen those topics is that they are ones that your learners already know about, and therefore they could be motivating for the learners. And also they could better understand the text because they're studying those same topics. For example, in a 7th grade class, they're studying in their science module about the cedars of Lebanon, and your textbook has picked up on that and chosen that. And they said to me, why didn't anybody ever explain that to us? It would have helped us a lot in our teaching if we'd known the reason for why these particular topics were chosen. Okay, and then finally, as with any curriculum, success in teaching is going to lie in the careful attention to all the details of implementation and to the coordination of teaching aims among instructors. I think we're at the point now where I can take some questions. So I'm happy to entertain questions or comments, and I hope people have been, I haven't been looking at the chat, to be honest. I thought that I would mute the chat so that I could concentrate on what it was I was presenting here, but I'm happy to take questions.
Wonderful. So what I'll do then is share some of the questions that came up in the Q&A as you were going along.
Perfect.
So one of our first questions that was voted up a little bit is, what does the research say is more effective, sustained theme or several themes in a semester?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm not sure that there's a lot of research that addresses that as a question, to be honest. My own inclination as a teacher trainer, as a practitioner of content-based instruction, is that the sustained content is more effective. simply because the learners get into the language, they acquire a lot of ways of talking about a topic, they get more into the sort of critical thinking aspects of the curriculum, and therefore I think that we get more bang for our buck with that type of a curriculum. The people who originally wrote about sustained content instruction had a lot of good arguments for why it was more effective. It's, however, not something that's been picked up by the textbook market really at all. So what you find in the textbooks that are out there are generally these shorter units that move from chapter to chapter with a different theme. And that's why this 6Ts context is, I think, pretty important. But I'm sorry I can't answer the question about what is more effective from the research point of view, because I haven't seen research that studies that. And I think it would be a very difficult research project to set up. Anytime we look at the real life classroom, and we're trying to say, is this approach better than that approach? We run up against all sorts of problems in the research design. I have designed my own sustained content units, and also was part of a project that did work on sustained content units for our advanced English language courses at UCLA. We did produce a textbook many, many years ago that had a sustained content approach. It was quite popular for a long period of time, but we never did a second edition of that. So I know that it was popular for that reason, and again, hasn't been picked up by a lot of other textbook publishers. There are a few others that are out there, especially for advanced level learners.
Great, thank you. So our next question actually is from Keith Falls. And it says, like all aspects of education and language education, content-based instruction is impacted by the world we live in. In your experience, what are the most common themes or topics used in content-based instruction in 2020?
Oh, that's a good question too. I'm not currently active as a teacher in the classroom, so I don't spend a lot of time looking at content-based textbooks myself. I don't think that there are a lot of new themes that are out there. I think that we see themes being recycled again and again with a slight twist on them. You know, the really popular ones have to do with the environment. A lot of them have, and it depends also on the age of the learners for whom the textbook is designed. Like I mentioned, the choice of deciding to talk about bugs in the Our World text is quite unique. I also know that, as I mentioned real briefly in passing, publishers have a list, as I mentioned, of these kind of safe topics that authors can use. I'm part of several Facebook groups, for example, where ELT authors rail against these lists that are created by the publishers because they feel that it's limiting their creativity. But again, because a textbook company wants to sell texts to as many places in the world as it possibly can, there are a lot of topics that are simply deemed off limit because they don't appeal to the learners in particular countries, or the ministries of education in those countries would not approve that textbook because it has what they consider to be a hot topic. So Keith, I'm sorry I didn't really answer your question there. But
Thanks,
I did my
Donna.
best I could.
We did have a question about the use of OER and how that relates to content-based instruction. Do you have, or do you want to share any of your thoughts on using open educational resources in, as opposed to a textbook from a publisher?
I would love to talk about that. my entire life has been devoted to, sort of creating teacher units as opposed to using commercial materials. And a lot of that has been because the contexts in which I taught, very often I couldn't find the kinds of textbooks out there that appealed to the learners that I was working with. In many cases, because I spent so many years working at UCLA in the matriculated student, with the matriculated student population, our learners were above the level at which most even the advanced materials in the textbook market were written. So we created almost all our own units, and we created these from open educational resources. One of the project I mentioned just in my last answer was this two text series called Insights, and we actually went around the university and knocked on the doors of professors. We taped 200 hours of actual academic lectures, and then edited that down to 8 cross-curricular units. And then we enhanced those videos with a lot of other resources that were available either as open educational resources or as ones that we could request copyright from. And that process of putting together a unit is something that I absolutely love. I think that's one of my first loves, is to create materials. My second love is to create texts for teachers to tell them how they can do this themselves. I think it's a wonderful learning experience. I would, however, caution anybody who wants to get into doing that generally this is work for which you won't be paid. It's a lot of extra time. It's a lot of extra energy. And you have to know that going into it. We were fortunate with the project that I did with my colleagues at UCLA, that all of the work that we put into this Insights project, which wasn't originally intended as a commercial publication, did then get picked up as a textbook. And we were able to get royalties off of that project. And so ultimately we did get paid for the work that we'd done. But the first 5 or so years that we were creating these video-based units from the university professors, it was just extra work because we all believed in this project.
I think that is maybe emblematic of a lot of our work. So I think we have time for one more question. Donna, there has been a request that you put your video on while you're answering questions. I think people would love to see your
I'm
face.
sorry, I did mean to do that. Let's see if I can do that. Can you see me now?
Wonderful. Yes, we can see you. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I did mean to do that.
Wonderful. I think our last question for today is, do you recommend theme-based instruction for an extensive reading course?
See, now you're going to have to see when I'm kind of like, oh dear, can I answer that question? So an extensive reading course and theme-based instruction. Is that the question? Amy, can you repeat the question again?
Yes, the question was, would you recommend theme-based instruction for an extensive reading course?
I think so. I think that would be a really good way of going about it. Because with extensive reading, what you're looking for is texts that you can kind of chain together. You're looking for a wide variety of texts so that the learners, can get that extensive reading experience. And I think that theme-based would be one way of kind of controlling what it is you're selecting and lending some kind of coherence to your extensive reading course, as opposed to just, a large number of different texts that don't relate to each other. It's getting back to that basic, problem of the if this is Tuesday, it must be Belgium. We really want to make sure that the learners are on the same page, that they're, gaining experience talking about a particular topic, enriching their vocabulary, enriching their grammatical resources, so that, and obviously, if it's reading, improving their reading skills by working with the same content and moving from text to text, but not leaving, this idea behind, but being able to kind of combine ideas, sustain their learning in that process. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I think in order to give everyone a break before the next session, we are finished. I want to personally thank you, and as a representative of CATISL, thank you, Donna, for opening up our virtual conference.
I'm just so relieved that we didn't have a lot of tech problems. So it was wonderful. I really enjoyed this experience. So glad that so many people decided to join this virtual conference. I think this is the best that we can do in the current times, and I'm really, really amazed that so many people were willing to take their time to join this conference. And I know it's going to be a great experience for everybody. So thank you all.